6 Real Madrid players are currently at the biggest tournament in world football, playing under the brightest lights imaginable. Millions are watching them. Entire nations are depending on them. Their focus is supposed to be on the next match. But back in Madrid, José Mourinho has reportedly already made a decision. Don't come back. Not literally, not yet. But according to multiple reports surrounding his return to the Bernabéu, Mourinho has identified 6 players who do not fit the future he wants to build. And the most unsettling part is this. Some of those players are not fringe squad members. Some of them are World Cup stars. Some of them are players many supporters assumed were untouchable. And Mourinho hasn't even officially started work. That is how abruptly this has happened. One board meeting, one agreement, one announcement, and suddenly, José Mourinho is back at Real Madrid for the first time in 13 years. A 3-year contract, full backing from Florentino Perez. A mandate to rebuild, no long introduction, no honeymoon period, no grace period, just a return, and almost immediately, a purge. Now on the surface, this looks ruthless, but the deeper you look, the more it starts to resemble something else. A club in crisis. Because Mourinho did not return to a healthy Real Madrid, he returned to a Real Madrid that had just endured one of its most chaotic seasons in recent memory. A trophy-less campaign, second place in La Liga, another Champions League quarterfinal exit. For most clubs, that would be disappointing. For Real Madrid, it is treated as failure. Complete failure. And when the results disappeared, the cracks underneath became impossible to ignore. Xabi Alonso arrived with enormous expectations. He was supposed to represent the future, the next generation, the long-term project. 7 months later, he was gone. Not 7 years, 7 months. That alone raised questions. But then came the stories from inside the dressing room, reports of tensions, frustration, a squad losing its balance, and perhaps nothing symbolized that breakdown more than the reported physical altercation between Federico Valverde and Aurelien Tchouameni during training. Think about that for a second. This is Real Madrid, the biggest club in world football, and yet the atmosphere had apparently deteriorated to the point where teammates were fighting each other, not opponents, teammates. Suddenly Mourinho's return started making more sense, because nobody hires José Mourinho when everything is working. You hire Mourinho when you think control has disappeared. You hire Mourinho when discipline is gone. You hire Mourinho when the dressing room needs a shock, and that is exactly what this feels like. A shock. Because according to reports, Mourinho did not arrive with a shopping list. He arrived with a leaving list. 6 names, 6 decisions, 6 players who reportedly do not fit the new vision. And the first group is the easiest to understand. The expected exits. The players whose departures feel cold but not surprising. Dani Ceballos is one of them. At one point, Ceballos was viewed as a midfielder with enormous potential. Technically gifted, creative, intelligent, but over time he became something else. A squad player. The man who appeared when the game no longer mattered. The rotation option, the backup plan, the emergency solution. And that's a dangerous place to be when Mourinho arrives. Because Mourinho values certainty. He values function. He values players who directly affect outcomes. Ceballos increasingly looked like a player simply occupying space between starting 11s. Rumors have already linked him elsewhere. Ajax has been mentioned. And fair or unfair, there is a feeling surrounding this move. A feeling that a Real Madrid career is not ending with a dramatic farewell. It's simply fading away, quietly. Then comes Fran García. And this one becomes more revealing, because there was actually a pathway for Garcia. Ferland Mendy has dealt with injury problems. Opportunities existed, minutes existed, openings existed, yet Mourinho appears unconvinced. Instead of waiting for existing options to develop, attention has shifted toward major defensive reinforcements, bigger names, more experienced names, more physically dominant profiles, and suddenly Garcia's situation looks less like bad luck and more like a verdict. Collateral damage, part of a larger reconstruction. Then there is Raúl Asencio, perhaps the most interesting name among the domestic group, because Asencio represents something Mourinho has historically struggled to prioritize. Potential, youth, patience, development. Asencio showed promise. He showed enough to make supporters curious about his future, but promise and production are not the same thing, and Mourinho has rarely been known for waiting, especially not after inheriting a crisis, especially not at Real Madrid, especially not when his his reputation depends on immediate success. So Asencio joins the list. 3 names. 3 departures that feel logical, harsh, but logical. And then the story changes completely, because the next names are not sitting at home. The next names are at the World Cup, right now. While supporters celebrate their performances, while cameras follow their every move, while national teams dream about lifting the trophy, Mourinho is reportedly evaluating them through an entirely different lens. Not as heroes, not as stars, not as fan favorites, as assets. And perhaps no name illustrates that better than Rodrigo, because if Rodrigo leaves Real Madrid, it will not be because he failed. That's what makes this so shocking. Rodrigo delivered some of the most memorable moments of Madrid's modern era. Champions League nights, comeback victories, goals under pressure, moments supporters will never forget. This is not a player being pushed out because he lacks quality. It's almost the opposite. Reports suggest the issue is tactical, structural, philosophical. Rodrigo thrives in fluidity, movement, freedom, unpredictability. He drifts, he adapts, he improvises. Those qualities are often celebrated, but under Mourinho, those same qualities may become complications, because Mourinho historically prefers systems where every role is clearly defined, every responsibility is fixed, every movement serves a specific purpose. Suddenly, Rodrigo's greatest strength becomes a question mark, not because he is not talented, because he may be talented in the wrong way. And if that sounds extreme, the next name makes it even stranger. Eduardo Camavinga, a player many supporters consider one of the most valuable young midfielders in football. Look at what Camavinga has done. Midfield, left back, defensive roles, attacking roles, different formations, different responsibilities. He adapts to everything. Most managers dream of having a player like that. Most managers view versatility as a gift. Yet under this reported rebuild, versatility may actually be the problem, because specialists and generalists are not the same thing. Camavinga has become football's version of a Swiss Army knife. Useful everywhere, reliable everywhere, capable everywhere. But Mourinho's systems have often been built around specialists, players who perform one task repeatedly and relentlessly. If that philosophy truly guides this rebuild, then Camavinga's adaptability suddenly becomes a contradiction, a strength transformed into a weakness. And that is where this stops feeling like a transfer story and starts feeling like an identity shift, because selling players like Rodrigo and Camavinga is not normal. Clubs spend years trying to acquire players like that. Real Madrid would potentially be choosing to remove them voluntarily, which raises an obvious question: why? The answer may be money, lots of it, because the reported rebuild Mourinho wants is expensive, very expensive. Figures approaching 200 million euros have been discussed regarding the scale of changes envisioned. New defenders, new reinforcements, new structure, new hierarchy, new standards. That money has to come from somewhere, and suddenly the logic becomes clearer, not kinder, not less controversial, clearer. You do not fund massive overhauls by selling unwanted fringe players. You fund them by selling valuable assets, and Rodrigo and Camavinga are extremely valuable assets. Then comes perhaps the most revealing name of all, Franco Mastantuono, because his inclusion exposes the deepest philosophical divide inside this entire story. Mastantuono represents the future, the long-term project, the investment, the idea that tomorrow matters as much as today. For years, Real Madrid increasingly embraced that strategy: find elite young talent. Develop elite young talent. Build around elite young talent. But Mourinho has never been famous for building distant futures. He is famous for demanding immediate results, immediate impact, immediate accountability, immediate success. Mastantuono may become a superstar. That is not the question. The question is whether Mourinho is willing to wait long enough to find out. And history suggests waiting is not his preferred approach, which brings us back to the bigger picture. Because this is not simply about 6 players. It's about what Real Madrid has become, and what Real Madrid is trying to become next. The club that once patiently assembled a new generation now appears willing to dismantle parts of it. The club that invested heavily in youth now seems prepared to prioritize certainty. The club that spoke about long-term planning is reportedly handing enormous power to a manager whose reputation was built on short-term transformation. That is a dramatic shift, and supporters can already see evidence of it everywhere, even in places nobody expected. For the first time in modern history, Real Madrid has no players representing Spain's national team squad. Think about how extraordinary that sounds. Real Madrid, the biggest Spanish club in the world, 0 representatives. That fact alone feels symbolic. A sign that something fundamental has changed. Something cultural, something structural, something deeper than tactics. Meanwhile, players like Valverde and Tchouaméni remain. Not because the season went smoothly, not because there were no concerns, but because Mourinho reportedly made a choice. A gamble. A calculated gamble. He looked at the chaos, he looked at the tension, he looked at the fractured dressing room, and decided those were pieces worth keeping. Others were not. That is the calculation. Cold, direct, unsentimental, and now everything points toward one date. July 13th. That is when Mourinho officially begins this new chapter. That is when preseason starts. That is when the rebuild becomes reality. And somewhere between now and then, 6 players are still chasing World Cup dreams. Still competing, still representing their countries, still living inside one football reality, while another reality is quietly taking shape back in Madrid. A reality where the decisions may already be made. A reality where futures are already being rewritten. A reality where some of them could return from the biggest tournament on earth only to discover there is no place waiting for them at the Bernabéu. Not because they failed, not because they stopped being talented, but because José Mourinho came back with a different plan, and this time the plan appears to leave no room for sentiment at all.